This is not a story about a transaction. It's an autopsy of a soul. Stop for a moment and let the chilling weight of this sentence settle. Sold in a dark market, the powerful baron paid everything without saying a word. Imagine the absolute, crushing finality of that moment. It's not the clink of chains or the slam of a cage door. It's the deafening silence after the hammer falls. It is the moment when your freedom ceases to be a birthright and becomes a line item on a ledger. A purchase executed with such cold, swift authority that it obliterates your past, your future, and your very name. Our journey begins in the shadow of that dreadful contract. We are not interested in the grimy details of the market itself, but the icy vacuum left in its wake. Who is this powerful baron? This ghost of authority who sees human beings not as people but as ultimate trophies. He didn't haggle. He didn't negotiate. He simply paid everything. A chilling display of resource and contempt. His silence isn't dignity. It's a weapon. It says, "You are so negligible, your struggle so irrelevant, that I won't even grant you the courtesy of a spoken command." This act of financial violence is the true first trauma. Now, shift your focus to the eyes of the one who was bought. What does it feel like to be valued purely by cost? To have your dreams, your memories, your defiant spirit reduced to a zero on a receipt? This isn't just physical captivity. It's a psychological siege. The protagonist is dropped into a world of impossible luxury and stifling control, a golden cage where the only rule is the unpredictable whim of the baron. Every velvet curtain, every gourmet meal, every moment of false safety is a constant, suffocating reminder you are owned. This is where the true battle begins, a war of wills fought in absolute silence. It is the desperate search for the crack in the facade of the baron's power, the tiny thread of humanity she must either find or extinguish within herself to survive. We will explore the subtle acts of rebellion, the defiant glances, the mental games played to maintain a shred of dignity when everything has been stripped away. Can a person who has been reduced to a commodity ever reclaim the priceless value of her own soul? Can the silence of absolute power ever be broken by a single resonant cry for justice? This is a deep dive into the darkest corners of control and the burning light of human endurance. It is a story designed not just to entertain, but to provoke and to make you question the true cost of power and the limits of the will to survive. You owe it to the story to see how this dark bargain plays out. The gavel has fallen, but there was no sound. Only the rustle of banknotes, a silent, contemptuous confirmation of a price paid in full. Paid everything without saying a word. That single act, the baron's mute, total financial annihilation of a life, is the starting point of our psychological excavation. We are not just witnessing a sale. We are observing the instantaneous severance of the soul from the body's destiny. Imagine the second after the transaction. The protagonist isn't screaming. The tears haven't even registered. There is only a dizzying, terrifying sense of weightlessness. It is the shocking realization that everything that defined you, your dreams, your memories, your small, fierce hopes, have been deemed worthless by the global currency of power and replaced by the value of a single astronomical number. This isn't imprisonment. It's erasure. The world that she knew is gone, and the one she is entering has already declared her existence null and void. She is quite simply an object that functions, breathes, and feels pain, but no longer has a say. The baron's cold silence is the most potent psychological weapon deployed. If he had shouted, if he had threatened, she would have had a defined enemy, a physical target for her fear. But his silence? It forces her to confront an enemy that is formless, absolute, and woven into the very fabric of the high society world he inhabits. He did not buy a slave. He purchased a living monument to his own indifference. The lack of communication strips her of even the dignity of an argument, a plea, or a final curse. She is not worth his breath. This is the ultimate paralyzing cruelty. This is the genesis of the furious void. The initial shock gives way not to passive despair, but to a silent, white-hot rage that crystallizes in her core. It is not the rage of a victim demanding rescue. It is the calculated, structural anger of a survivor who knows she has to rebuild her entire identity from scratch, piece by piece, inside her captor's flawless, suffocating architecture. This fury is her anchor. It is the defiant secret promise she makes to herself. You may own my body, but you will never possess my contempt. This emotion is the fuel for her survival, manifesting in the only way she can express it: the refusal to drop her gaze, the measured lack of compliance, the inner monologue that screams defiance while her lips remain sealed. We must understand that the life she is now forced to lead, amidst silk sheets, bespoke clothing, and an endless array of staff, is meticulously designed to be a deeper form of torment. The luxury is a gilded taunt. Every comfort is a chain that binds her to the man who provided it. She is forced to struggle against the insidious, paralyzing temptation to become comfortable in her gilded cage. To accept the comfort would be to accept the Baron's premise, that she is better off being owned by him than being free and struggling. The true conflict is internal, the battle to prevent her soul from succumbing to the subtle, deadly lure of gratitude for her own enslavement. The protagonist has been reduced to a financial artifact, and every interaction with the Baron, no matter how benign on the surface, is a grim reminder of her price. He doesn't need to bark orders. His presence alone, his very existence as the man who owns everything, dictates her movements. Her only power now is her inner sanctuary, the inviolable space of her mind, where she can continue to declare her freedom even as her body is forced to serve. This desperate search for a weapon where there are none, this quiet internal declaration of war against the man who paid everything without saying a word, is the tragic, provocative core of our story. Our gaze now turns to the architect of this despair, the figure who paid the ultimate price for absolute ownership, the powerful Baron. Forget the image of a snarling villain in a fortress. The true terror lies in his meticulous, utterly modern camouflage. The Baron is impeccable, tailored, and alarmingly calm. His power doesn't reside in shouting or physical intimidation. It exists in the effortless, silent command of systems, wealth, and influence. He is the monster who appears entirely normal, attending galas, making charitable donations, and speaking softly, a polished facade that makes his underlying cruelty all the more chilling and real. He is dangerous precisely because he is discreet and monstrous. He operates within the high-gloss realm of legitimate business and impenetrable social circles. This setting, the mansion, the private jets, the curated art collection, is not a backdrop. It is an active instrument of his tyranny. By placing the protagonist in a world of blinding luxury, he not only asserts his control over her environment, but seeks to colonize her very perception of reality. The conflict is no longer between good and evil, but between survival and the seductive comfort of his corruption. The true psychological horror is encapsulated in the phrase, "paid everything." Why such a total expenditure? Not out of necessity. The Baron is defined by an absolute, profound boredom. He has exhausted the thrill of collecting wealth, art, and influence. His purchase of a human being is the ultimate forbidden novelty, a search for a challenge that money supposedly cannot buy, the unbroken spirit. He bought not just the body but the capacity for resistance. His investment is a calculated, cold bet that he can systematically break a soul and watch the process unfold from his comfortable vantage point. His silence during the transaction wasn't apathy. It was the chilling confidence of a man who knows the fight has just begun, and that the only sound he needs to hear is the eventual snap of her will. The Baron's most terrifying tool is the rule of the non-rule. He does not impose crude visible chains. Instead, he allows the protagonist a veneer of freedom. She may have access to a library, a garden, perhaps even some independence within the compound. This is a deliberate, cruel strategy. By granting this false liberty, he ensures that the protagonist is not fighting an external cage, but an internal one. She is forced to live in constant, exhausting uncertainty, always anticipating the invisible line she cannot cross. This psychological ambiguity breeds toxic gratitude. The Baron may perform acts of calculated kindness, providing a dress, offering a book, or engaging in a seemingly genuine conversation. These moments are meticulously crafted traps. They force the protagonist to feel a flicker of human connection, a brief, treacherous thought that perhaps he is not all bad. This is the true danger, the emotional manipulation designed to make her question her own outrage and feel a perverse, forced obligation to her captor. The Baron doesn't want simple obedience. He wants the total submission of her moral compass. His elegant silence, therefore, is the sound of absolute contempt. He views the world, and now the protagonist, as an inert collection of resources to be managed, manipulated and consumed for his pleasure. Our narrative focuses on the subtle, seismic friction created when this implacable, silent authority meets the protagonist's burning, internal resolve. The challenge is not to escape the mansion, but to successfully defend the last remaining territory. The sacred, defiant autonomy of the mind. The physical sale is over. The psychological war has just begun. The protagonist and the Baron are now locked in a perpetual silent duel, a game of emotional cat and mouse, where the stakes are not merely survival, but the very definition of humanity. This is the heart of our drama, a constant, exhausting exchange of power and defiance. Since overt confrontation is suicide, the protagonist's weapon must be dignity and intelligence. Her acts of rebellion are microscopic yet potent. It's in the way she holds her spine straight, the unblinking quality of her gaze when the Baron speaks, the precise, measured distance she keeps. When the Baron offers a compliment, she accepts it not with gratitude, but with a cool neutrality that says, "Your approval means nothing to me. Your words are just noise." Every interaction is a battlefield. She must expend massive mental energy to prevent her fear from translating into submission, making her every breath a conscious act of resistance. The Baron, in turn, is a master manipulator. He aims to break her not by force, but by seeking the crack in her humanity. He may subtly probe her past, her lost loves or her forgotten dreams, offering a false sense of empathy. He might share a philosophical thought, or reveal a sliver of his own twisted loneliness, hoping to elicit a moment of pity or connection. This is the most dangerous trap. If the protagonist lets down her guard, if she mistakes his calculated performance for genuine vulnerability, he will use that knowledge as leverage to tighten the psychological noose. The conflict hinges on her desperate need to defend her internal truth from being contaminated or used as her ultimate weakness. This leads to the crisis of the human element. The Baron craves control, but he also craves the spectacle of a broken spirit returning to him for comfort. He may intentionally inflict a minor hardship, a sudden isolation, a pointed critique, only to follow it with an extravagant gift or an act of protection. This calculated cycle of punishment and reward is designed to induce a form of Stockholm Syndrome, twisting her perception of reality until she sees him as both the source of her pain and the necessary provider of her solace. The intensity of this emotional whiplash is what makes the dynamic so visceral and provocative. But amidst the Baron's suffocating world, a light of perilous hope must flicker. The protagonist might spot a glimmer of dissent among the household staff, a driver with a tired, knowing look, a cook who leaves an encouraging note, or a security guard who ignores a glance too long. This development introduces the factor of risky alliance. Establishing a connection with an outsider is an act of high treason, requiring silent signals, coded messages, and an absolute reliance on the shared belief that the Baron's power is not absolute. This is the story's greatest emotional gamble. The ally is not a hero, but a fellow prisoner who risks annihilation for a sliver of justice. The success of this pact could mean freedom. The failure means the ultimate crushing despair for both. The protagonist must decide if the risk of trusting this unknown entity, risking not only her life, but the life of her potential savior, is worth the chance at a life beyond the Baron's endless, terrifying silence. This choice, made under the intense pressure of her captivity, is the spark that will ignite the final explosive confrontation. The emotional cat and mouse game has shifted to a deadly game of chess, where the smallest mistake results in checkmate. The game of survival has reached its breaking point. The protagonist has endured the Baron's silent tyranny and navigated the treacherous waters of his psychological traps. Now her focus shifts from simply surviving to destroying the very system that bought her. This is not an escape predicated on scaling walls or dodging bullets. It's an intellectual and moral breakout that weaponizes the Baron's own arrogance against him. The critical insight she gains is this: the fact that the Baron paid everything without saying a word is not a sign of his absolute power, but the blueprint of his eventual downfall. His silence and his extravagant expenditure are the evidence. He believed he was buying a possession. He failed to realize he was merely acquiring a story with devastating potential. The protagonist recognizes that the Baron fears exposure and public disgrace more than he fears prison. His power exists in the shadows of respectability. Bring the transaction into the light, and his empire crumbles. The true act of freedom is not physical flight, but the strategic public shattering of his impeccable facade. The plan, therefore, is not a mad dash for the border, but a strategic revelation. The protagonist must use the very luxury of her confinement, the high-tech communication systems, the secure documents, the access to the world he thought he controlled, as her means of egress. She is not seeking to disappear. She is seeking to become unignorable. Her escape involves gathering irrefutable proof of the dark market transaction, converting her story into a digital, self-replicating weapon designed to hit the Baron where he is most vulnerable, his reputation and financial networks. The final confrontation is built upon this strategic cerebral action. It might be a timed release of data to international journalists, a video testament filmed in the Baron's own luxurious study, or the meticulous exposure of the deep connections between his legitimate business and the shadow market. This is the moment where the protagonist stops being the object of the Baron's silence and starts becoming the thunderous voice of accountability. The action is intense not for the physical struggle, but for the agonizing tension of a single click, a shared file, or a whispered password that determines the fate of two lives. The climax arrives not with a prison break, but with the confrontation of the new price. The protagonist, having successfully deployed her narrative weapon, turns to face the Baron or his shocked emissary. She has calculated the emotional debt and the moral cost of his purchase. Her new price is no longer measured in the vast sum he originally paid, but in the irrevocable loss of his standing. She paid for her freedom with her suffering. Now he must pay for his crime with his empire. She uses his own language of transaction against him. You paid everything without a word. Now you will pay your silence back with a world of noise. The ending of our story must redefine the concept of freedom. It is not just about escaping the physical walls. It is about reclaiming the right to narrate her own life, to dictate her own value. The protagonist leaves the opulent prison with a new title, not the one who was sold, but the one who fought back and bought her own soul, back at the expense of her tormentor's destruction. The ultimate question the audience is left with is, can the Baron, whose life was defined by silent authority, survive the catastrophic volume of his exposed truth? The emotional weight of the narrative rests on the profound, challenging realization that the greatest act of liberation is turning your trauma into a source of unstoppable power. We have navigated the chilling landscape where freedom is a commodity and silence is the language of tyranny. The journey began with the visceral shock of a single, catastrophic moment. Sold in a dark market, and the powerful Baron paid everything without saying a word. But as we conclude, that initial trauma is no longer a final verdict. It is the crucible that forged an unbreakable will. The story of the protagonist is a defiant answer to the question, can absolute power truly buy everything? The Baron believed his immense wealth could purchase not just a life, but the inherent human right to self-determination. He sought to impose a total silence, a void where her will and identity once stood, using the gilded cage of luxury as his most sophisticated weapon. Yet in his arrogance, he overlooked the one thing that is not for sale, the unyielding fire of the soul. The true victory in this narrative is not the physical escape, but the moral and intellectual triumph achieved in Topic 4. The protagonist realized that the Baron's financial transaction, executed with such cold contempt, was not the end of her story, but the evidence of his crime. By weaponizing her truth, by turning her trauma into a public, undeniable record, she transformed from a purchased object into a force of devastating accountability. She didn't just break free, she initiated a spectacular, systemic collapse of the very power structure that sought to consume her. Our conclusion leaves us with a provocative reflection. The Baron's silence has been definitively broken by the thunderous volume of his exposed cruelty. He now faces a debt he cannot settle with money, the unpaid debt of the soul. His luxury, once his shield, becomes his prison. His silence, once his tool, becomes the echoing witness to his ruin. This story is a powerful testament to the enduring human capacity to resist erasure. It is a demand that we look beyond the surface of polished privilege and ask, what is the real cost of absolute power? And what sacrifices must be made to reclaim your priceless dignity when the world has already sold you short? The protagonist's journey is a challenge to all of us to recognize that even in the darkest market, the price of the human spirit remains infinitely high and eternally non-negotiable.